The fog was thick that morning, curling like ghostly fingers over the Arkansas River, when the truck disappeared. It was as if the earth had simply swallowed it whole. One moment, 39-year-old Dennis Harper was driving his blue Peterbilt rig down Highway 64 into the early dawn, radio humming low, thermos steaming softly beside him. The next, he was gone. No skid marks, no broken guardrail, no oil slick or debris, just vanished, without so much as a whisper. His wife Lisa reported him missing within hours, her voice cracking over the phone, riddled with a fear she couldn't explain but couldn't shake either. For the next 2 decades, investigators, psychics, and conspiracy theorists alike would chase smoke and shadows, haunted by a single gnawing question: how does a man behind the wheel of a 20-ton machine disappear into thin air? The investigation spiraled quickly from urgency to confusion. Search crews scoured the highway's edges, combing the underbrush for tire tracks or any clue that might offer clarity. Helicopters buzzed overhead, their blades slicing through the mist as they scanned the riverbanks and gravel shoulders. Local news stations flashed Harper's face across the screen, brown eyes full of quiet resolve, the kind of weathered smile born from long nights and endless miles. His route logs said he should have reached Little Rock by noon. He never did. Instead, time moved on without him, inch by inch, like the slow drift of the river that once may have swallowed him. Investigators found nothing, not the rig, not the driver, not even a faded scrap of clothing along the road. The Arkansas River held its silence, and in the absence of answers, something darker began to settle. The unsettling realization that Dennis Harper hadn't just vanished, he had been erased. Lisa Harper clung to hope like a thread unraveling with each passing day. Her husband's belongings remained untouched in their modest home outside Van Buren, his boots by the door, his jacket still draped over the back of a kitchen chair. She refused to move them. "He'll need them when he comes back," she would whisper, voice hollowed by loss. Friends offered sympathy, neighbors brought casseroles, but none of it could fill the deafening silence that had taken residence in the house. Nights bled into mornings without sleep as she replayed her last conversation with Dennis. A brief phone call from the road, ordinary yet now wretched with significance. "Traffic's light," he'd said. "Should be home by dinner." But dinner came and went. So did seasons. And denial, once a balm, began twisting into suspicion. Because something didn't add up, not just the disappearance, but what came after, or, more precisely, what didn't come at all. No follow-up tips, no new evidence, and no movement in a case that had frozen in time. It was as if someone wanted it that way. In the years that followed, half-truths, rumors, and whispers filled the vacuum left by Dennis Harper's vanishing act. Some claimed to have seen his rig nosing down a narrow service road near the river the morning he disappeared. Others, swearing by the strange, rhythmic hum of trucks heard in the dead of night, believed the riverbank concealed secrets the county would rather forget. A retired trucker named Hank "Red" Mullins came forward in 2002, telling local reporters he'd seen Dennis's Peterbilt just before sunrise, idling at a rest stop near Lake Dardanelle, doors shut but engine still running. Red said he didn't think much of it, then drivers nap off the road all the time. But what haunted him later was the silence. No movement. No lights inside. Just the steady exhale of diesel smoke rising into the sky, as if the truck itself was holding its breath. Authorities dismissed Red's recollection as unreliable, but Lisa didn't. She began stitching her own map from scattered testimonies and forgotten reports, a tapestry of possibilities sewn together with grief. There was one place she hadn't dared look deep beneath the river's shifting face. Only the water knew the whole truth. 2 decades passed like a dream a family was forced to stay awake in. Life moved forward in fits and stutters for Lisa Harper, her world wrapped in faded missing posters and unanswered calls. Then, in the summer of 2012, a drought gripped the region with a slow and ruthless squeeze. Water levels across Arkansas fell to their lowest in over 30 years. Rivers that once devoured the light now began coughing up their secrets. It started with rusted shopping carts and forgotten tires, but then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, a group of volunteer divers scouring a shallow bend in the Arkansas River near Dardanelle made a grim discovery. Beneath the muddy current, cloaked in layers of silt and swallowed vines, lay the sunken shell of a truck cab. Blue paint. Cracked glass. Faint, but unmistakable Peterbilt. As the divers surfaced, one held up something in his trembling hands. A faded wallet, its leather bloated from time. Inside, a driver's license no one had expected to see again. Dennis Harper had been there the whole time, hidden in the one place no one had dared look deeply enough. The news swept through the town like wildfire, igniting a grief they'd learned to live around but never through. By dusk, the riverbank had become a quiet graveyard of blinking lights and hushed voices. Lisa stood at the edge of the muddy water, her hands shaking as officers confirmed the ID. What remained of Dennis' bone fragments, a wedding band. The rusted cab was pulled up piece by piece, like memories dredged from a dream. Journalists crowded the barricades, their cameras like 100 unblinking eyes. But Lisa didn't see them. She only stared at the broken Peterbilt, its front end crushed inward like it had tried to fight back against something that swallowed it whole. Investigators wrapped themselves in theories: mechanical failure, driver fatigue, a missed curve in the road, but none of it answered the most haunting question. Why there? Why then? And why had it taken 20 years for the truth to float to the surface? A death, yes, but not an ending. Because under layers of mud and years of forgetting, another question had begun to form like a crack in concrete. If Dennis Harper had gone into that river in 1992, then who made the call logged on Lisa's phone 3 days after his disappearance? An anonymous voice that said only 3 chilling words before hanging up: he saw too much. The message haunted her like a ghost with unfinished business. She didn't tell anyone at first, not even the police. It seemed too implausible, too cruel. And yet, its echo lived in her every breath. He saw too much. It wasn't just a prank. Something in that voice had chilled her marrow. A flat mechanical cadence that lacked emotion but dripped with implication. Like whoever spoke those words wasn't warning her but letting her know, letting her feel watched. Lisa reviewed the phone records repeatedly. The call came from a burned, untraceable number. No other messages, no follow-up. But the timing 3 days after Dennis vanished, it was like a signal, or worse, a warning. Skeptics said it meant nothing. But Lisa recognized a pattern in the silence, a rhythm in the waiting. This wasn't an accident. She was certain now. Whatever took Dennis hadn't expected him to go missing quietly. Somewhere between the miles of interstate and the twisted logic of fear, a deeper truth was waiting. And the river, it seemed, had only given up part of it. In September of that same year, a Freedom of Information Act request filed by a regional journalist uncovered a forgotten trove of investigative materials previously sealed by the county due to ongoing concerns of public disturbance. Among the documents was a placed ADE, dated log entry, from July 1992, just days before Dennis disappeared, detailing a report from a night shift dispatcher at a way station along Harper's route. The entry, barely legible beneath coffee stains and time, described a man matching Dennis's appearance arriving in the early hours looking distressed, paranoid, and insistent on speaking with federal agents. He refused to elaborate, instead scribbling something frantic on the back of a way slip before abruptly driving off. That slip never made it into official files, but a photocopy remained, unearthed now under layers of dust. In shaky block letters it read, "Tanker. Not fuel. Military plates." They switched it out. No signature. No explanation. But it tangibly shifted the tone of the case from tragedy to conspiracy. Whatever Dennis Harper had stumbled onto that July morning, one thing was now unmistakably clear: he hadn't just vanished. He had been disappeared. The cryptic message on the way slip took on a life of its own, whispering its disjointed secrets across newsroom desks and late-night forum threads like some half-buried curse. Tanker. Not fuel. The words echoed with grim insinuation, unraveling a shadow thread that stretched far beyond a missing trucker and deep into the opaque fog of Cold War residue that clung to Arkansas's military-industrial corridors. Former Fort Chaffee personnel quietly confirmed that in 1992, Homeland Transport Logistics, a subcontractor under military clearance, organized a series of midnight transfers involving unidentified tankers. Their contents were never logged. Some speculated chemical testing. Others whispered about weapons disposal. The phrase, "they switched it out," lit a fire within a small cadre of local truth-seekers. What had Harper seen along those back roads? What could compel a man hardened by decades on the highway to plead with federal agents and vanish 3 days later? Lisa stared at the photocopied way slip again and again, fingers tracing the ink like it might give way to fingerprints. Behind every letter, a ghost seemed to scream, and in the silence that followed, she began to understand. Dennis had seen something no one was meant to see, something you could vanish for. The deeper she looked, the thinner the air felt around her. Lisa began connecting threads long ignored, drawing shaky lines on dusty maps with trembling hands. She retraced Dennis's last logged route mile by mile, cross-referencing way station footage, archived satellite feeds, and even whistleblower accounts, long buried in message board noise. What emerged was a pattern erratic, but undeniable. Truckers who ran Harper's southern corridor in the early 1990s, particularly during off-peak federal transit hours, reported sightings of unmarked convoys, hauling sealed tankers with no manifest and heavy military escort. Some remembered their CB radios going dead near certain mile markers. Others spoke of black SUVs idling at public exits, always watching but never acting. A few, frightened by how their curiosity was answered with anonymous threats, stopped speaking altogether. Lisa documented everything, stored it all in a weathered binder marked DH92, and kept it under her bed. It felt like assembling a puzzle with pieces that weren't supposed to exist, and each new discovery darkened the outline of a truth too terrifying to fully name. Her husband hadn't run into an accident. He had run into something designed to be invisible, and whoever built that wall of silence was still guarding it. One fog-soaked entry in Lisa's binder detailed a site near a decommissioned rail spur south of Ozark, Arkansas, a location mentioned in multiple trucker forums as a place to avoid after dark. Hemmed in by rusting fencing and decaying warehouse shells, the area was long rumored to have been part of a Cold War-era chemical storage and disposal network. In October 1992, just 3 months after Dennis vanished, a low-yield explosion scorched a third of that property. Officially, it was blamed on faulty demolition prep, but one report, buried within EPA compliance archives, noted unidentified vehicle debris present in the blast zone. Debris that matched the make and model of a Peterbilt cab. That snippet, long overlooked, hit Lisa like a bolt of frozen lightning. Could Dennis's truck have been moved post-disappearance? Staged and torched to erase it? The implications threatened to unravel what little piece she'd mustered. If the timeline was manipulated, if Dennis had survived past July, then the truth wasn't just submerged beneath the river's surface. It had been deliberately burned, buried, and rewritten. And someone had gone to great lengths to make sure it stayed that way. In early 2013, Lisa took another desperate step, reaching out to Raymond Archer, a former criminal analyst turned independent investigator known for poking holes in sealed cases and sometimes, according to some, inviting danger with every answer he clawed free. Archer agreed to meet with her in a quiet diner off Interstate 40. Over thick coffee and static-laced cassette tapes spread across the table, Lisa laid out her binder like a sacred text. Archer listened, mostly in silence, only his brow tightening as names, places, and dates began to overlap with cases he'd once followed to dead ends. One tape in particular made him sit forward a recorded CB transmission from August 1992, captured by coincidence on a hobbyist's open band scanner. In it, 2 drivers, their voices grainy, discuss a third ghost hopper riding tale through the Ozark corridor. One refers to it plainly, "It ain't fuel in that tanker." And the guy up front? Dead man walkin'. Silence followed on the tape longer than seemed natural, then static, then nothing. Archer turned off the device gently and looked Lisa in the eye. "Whoever they were talking about," he said slowly. "I think it was your husband." The months that followed became a whirlwind of calculated risks and narrowing roads for Lisa and Archer. Together, they traced the last remaining anomalies dock records with missing manifests, hazy nighttime sightings of flatbeds escorted by unmarked sedans. Each document gathered was like a pin driven deeper into a map. Bowman County officials seemed desperate to ignore. Then came the break neither expected. An envelope, unmarked and unsigned, arrived on Archer's office doorstep one cold March morning. Inside were 3 photographs, grainy, discolored, but chillingly clear. The first, a Peterbilt identical to Dennis's rig, parked beside a tanker stamped with a code tied to government chemical disposal contracts. The second, a man in a reflective vest, slumped and bound inside what looked like the back of a military transport truck. And the third, perhaps the most damning, showed a close-up of a way slip, the same handwriting, the same chilling line. They switched it out. Archer's hands trembled as he flipped through the images, realization growing like roots into stone. What they were chasing was no longer a theory. It was a truth buried in cold soil, preserved in secrecy, and protected by men who would rather erase lives than confess to ghosts. And Lisa, armed now with more than grief, whispered to the photograph of her husband, "I know what they did, and I'm not letting you disappear again." Lisa and Archer realized time wasn't on their side. The deeper they dug, the more a quiet resistance seemed to rise around them, documents vanishing from city archives, polite officials suddenly dodging calls, and on one occasion, Archer's car found with its brake lines severed in a motel parking lot. Yet neither stopped. Because now, it wasn't just about Dennis, it was about how far the rot had spread. Archer's analysis of the photographs revealed something more chilling. The way slip bore a secondary stamp, USAF FD-92, marking it as flagged by a now-defunct intel processing wing of the Air Force, known for handling domestic surveillance intercepts. This wasn't civilian cargo. Whatever had been in that tanker was freighted not just in secrecy but in federal immunity. They had to get the photographs authenticated and in the right hands, but trust had become luxury. One night, as Lisa sat thumbing through her binder, a power outage swept through her neighborhood. Seconds later, a low idol growled outside her home. She peered out her window. No cars, no lights, just the Arkansas dark. But she felt it, that same presence she'd felt after the call in 1992. Watching, waiting. The ghosts were awake again. And this time, they knew she was coming. In April 2013, Lisa and Archer drove across state lines to meet with a contact buried within a contracting firm once tied to Homeland Transport Logistics. The man insisted on anonymity, meeting them in a roadside chapel north of Memphis under flickering fluorescent light and the creak of tired stained glass. He looked aged beyond his years, eyes darting like someone remembering his life through a sniper's scope. "You want the truth?" he asked, voice brittle. It wasn't fuel, it wasn't legal, and they were never going to let that truck reach Little Rock. He slipped Archer a mangled folder, edges blackened from fire. Its contents mostly charred, but one photo had survived. It showed a group of men loading sealed metal canisters tagged with radiation hazard symbols into a tanker at night. With Dennis's rig parked only feet away, Lisa could barely breathe. The pieces clicked together like tumblers in a lock she'd spent 20 years trying to turn. Dennis hadn't just witnessed a covert transfer. He had become part of its cover-up. 20 years of silence. 20 years of doubt. And yet, standing beneath that chapel's cross, a strange strength filled her because suddenly, after all this time, she knew where the truth lived. It was no longer buried in mud or fire. It lived in light, and she would bring it out, no matter what it cost. But truth, as Lisa was learning, didn't come easy. It arrived, burdened by cost. Within weeks of the chapel meeting, their every move felt shadowed. Archer began receiving anonymous voicemails digitally scrambled, a mechanical voice urging him to drop it before it drops you. Lisa's emails were flagged, her phone tapped, but fear only sharpened her resolve. As she prepared a full dossier of evidence for a federal oversight panel, the weight of 2 decades of love, despair, and suspicion seemed to collapse into crystal clarity. Dennis hadn't simply vanished. He had been silenced, swallowed by a machine built to mask its tracks and erase its witnesses. Yet now, that machine had a crack. On a rainy afternoon in June 2013, Lisa stood outside a courthouse with Archer by her side, a sealed envelope trembling in her hands. She whispered her husband's name like a promise, like a war cry. This time, the river wouldn't bury it. This time, the story wouldn't end in silence. The court petition was filed under whistleblower protection statutes, citing threats, obstruction, and tampering with evidence in a presumed federal operation gone rogue. The response came swiftly, no public acknowledgement, no press conferences, just a discreet summons for Lisa and Archer to testify behind closed doors in Washington. There, in a sterile room under watchful government eyes, they laid everything bare. The photographs, the way slips, the CB transmission tape, and the survivor testimony. For hours they answered questions sown with disbelief and cloaked validation. And then it was over. They were told they'd be contacted. Days passed, then weeks. And then, at last, a letter arrived, postmarked, from an untraceable federal office. "Your case has been acknowledged and absorbed into an internal investigation," it read. "But due to matters of national interest, no further disclosures will be made." Signed not with a name, but a classification code. Lisa sat with the letter in her lap, still as stone, eyes searching it for meaning. She had dragged the truth into the light, only to watch it be swallowed again, but this time, not in darkness, in bureaucracy, in silence, polished to legality. Yet in her hands, truth had changed shape. It was no longer a ghost. It was a wound, visible, bleeding, and still beating. And in that relentless ache, Dennis Harper finally lived again, not forgotten, not erased, but remembered by the woman who refused to stop listening when the world stopped speaking. In the quiet months that followed, Lisa moved slowly through the echoing halls of her home, forever changed in a way no ruling or resolution could undo. The photographs were now framed and tucked beside a memorial candle on her mantel, not as trophies, but as totems, proof that memory could outlive erasure. At night, she sometimes dreamed of Dennis driving along some endless stretch of highway, headlights slicing through dark, open country. In those dreams, he never spoke, only looked at her through the mirror, eyes steady, as if to say, "You found me." The wind howled outside in harmony with the past, but inside, she sat quietly. A woman who had walked through fire and water to wrestle truth from silence. She knew now that some disappearances are not about vanishing, but being made invisible by design. Yet light, insistent and stubborn, always finds a crack. And in that small, unwavering brightness, the story of Dennis Harper remained not just a cautionary tale, but a testament to the love that uncovered the lie and the woman who refused to let the river have the last word. There were no headlines, no sweeping arrests, only a subtle shift. A new internal directive circulated quietly through transport oversight agencies, mandating higher transparency in contracted cargo logs. Nothing directly tied to Dennis Harper's case. Nothing that bore Lisa's name. But she noticed. So did Archer. In the months after their testimony, there were fewer late-night convoys on the southern corridor, fewer unmarked trucks idling in backlot silence. There was a sense, however faint, that the behemoth had stirred, if only for a moment, and while publishers hesitated and officials issued no comment, whispers grew louder in the corners of veteran forums and journalist backchannels. The name Dennis Harper became a code, a symbol not of conspiracy, but of consequence, that a life pushed into the margins could pull the truth back into focus. In the end, the river had failed to keep its secret. The world moved forward, not with closure, but with eyes newly open. And as she stood once more by the waters that once lied and buried, Lisa let the wind lift a single page torn from her binder, letting it dance toward the current. It bore only 4 words, her final answer: he mattered. He mattered. But even as Lisa tried to place the weight of her grief into something like peace, the question remained, what had Dennis seen that sealed his fate? What truth was heavy enough to merit 20 years of silence, enough to prompt quiet policy shifts but not public reckoning? Archer, now working privately on cases of enforced disappearance, continued to sift through shadows in search of long-ignored names, and Lisa, still visited by suspicions in daylight and dreams alike, marked every unsolved case of a missing driver with a highlighter on her corkboard wall. Because for her, Dennis's story was no longer about the past. It wasn't just about what had been taken. It was about who else might still be out there, trapped in machinery, abandoned in quiet fields, ghosts of another kind whispering through diesel wind. And so the work continued, quiet and unpaid, driven by love and indignation. For the river may forget, but Lisa Harper would not. The system may choose silence, but she had chosen to remember. And in that choice, steady and defiant, the truth lived on, carried now not by one voice, but by a legacy of refusal to let the vanished remain unseen. In a locked drawer at the Veterans Library in Fort Smith, a dusty donation box marked Anonymous was finally opened in the summer of 2015. It contained a single reel of 8mm film, a dated manifest list, and a journal scrawled in uneven handwriting, pages soaked with age, stained by what looked like regret. The film showed night vision footage, grainy but unmistakable. Military personnel loading 3 unmarked tankers on a remote runway, time-stamped precisely the night Dennis Harper disappeared. The journal chronicled what the author called Operation Gossamer, a joint venture between Homeland Transport and a now-defunct private defense contractor, allegedly moving unclassified hazardous material without federal oversight. One line in the entry broke Lisa when she saw it, traced in faded ink like a confession finally breathed. Driver objected. Made call from way station. Detained. Resolved en route. Resolved. A word meant to erase. And yet, in the quiet reveal of those relics, there was something else. The unraveling of a vow, made in whispers and rain. A truth long denied gaining gravity at last. Not every name finds justice. Not every mystery earns a headline. But some disappearances, when remembered fiercely enough, open doors that secrecy cannot bolt forever. And behind that final door, just maybe, Dennis Harper stood, not silent, not erased, but waiting to be heard. In the years that followed the final discovery at the Fort Smith Library, Lisa Harper became an unintentional historian of the unacknowledged. She archived the documents, cross-referenced timelines, and quietly assisted families who had found themselves in the same silent vortex, one parent missing here, one unexplained crash there. Her home transformed into something between a refuge and a decryption room. What began as grief had become resistance. And every wall covered in red yarn and faded reports told a story the world tried to forget. Occasionally, a new envelope would arrive postmarked from nowhere, containing evidence too precise to be coincidence. Archer still called once a month, sometimes only to say he'd found another name, another CB log, another dusk ride that ended in silence. And still, the water flowed. Always the river, as if daring them to forget. But Lisa never did. Somewhere between the rusted machinery of conspiracy and the tender ache of absence, she forged something unbreakable. Testimony forged by fire. Love made louder than death. She no longer feared the ghosts that circled her home. They were no longer warnings. They were witnesses. And against everything that tried to fade him from the world, Dennis Harper remained. Remembered. Named. Seen. In a televised congressional subcommittee hearing held quietly in late 2016, a redacted portion of the Homeland Transport records was finally declassified, not with drama, but with undeniable gravity. Page after page of logistics detail unfurled for the public record, including 4 tanker shipments in July 1992, designated as DHC-92, later traced to non-compliant hazmat storage along U.S. Highway 64. The timing, the route, even the manifest codes matched the fragments Lisa and Archer had painstakingly assembled. Though the hearings used no names, and nobody mentioned Dennis Harper aloud, Lisa watched from her living room as truth unspooled on national television in half-spoken sentences and carefully measured jargon. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She clutched the edges of her chair like she was holding onto a shoreline, refusing to be dragged under again. In that moment, she understood the price of knowing a river of silence that had carried her this far, now parted just enough to glimpse solid ground beyond. Dennis Harper, the trucker who vanished, wasn't a ghost anymore. He was a page in the record, a wound the system could no longer bandage with omission. And in the long, cold testament of the disappeared, his name now carried the weight of something final, something undeniable, truth, spoken at last, even if it whispered. And still the question lingers like fog refusing to lift: what would the world be if more voices like Lisa's were allowed to echo? If the pain of one wife, one man, one vanished truth could stir a system designed not to hear? For every Dennis Harper etched into silence, there is another hidden just beyond the reach of light. Somewhere tonight, another truck hums along dark roads. Another driver glances into rear-view shadows that know too much. But Dennis's story became more than a tragedy. It became a signal, a quiet proof that truth, even after decades of burial, can claw its way into the open if we are relentless enough to listen, brave enough to believe, and unwilling to let go. And so the story doesn't end. Not in rivers or file drawers or closed doors. It persists in rustling leaves, in tire tracks that never reach their destination, in wives who refuse to forget. The truth lives, not because it was granted by the powerful, but because it was demanded by the unyielding. And in the hushed twilight that knows the cost of silence, Dennis Harper's name remains a flicker in the dark that refuses to die out. Years after the hearings faded from memory, and the headlines turned to fresher tragedies, the town of Van Buren held a small ceremony on the banks of the Arkansas River. No media fanfare, no officials in polished shoes, just townspeople, scattered across damp grass, eyes cast toward the water that once stole a life and birthed a reckoning. A plaque had been installed with quiet reverence, not a grand monument, but a simple engraving beneath a silhouette of a truck cab, partially submerged beneath ripples. Dennis Harper, 1953, 1992, never lost, always seen. Lisa stood at its side, her hand brushing the cool metal, her hair tousled by a wind that seemed to remember. There were no speeches, no formal blessings, but as dusk fell and fireflies began to flicker like faint memories trying to return, the crowd remained as if not ready to let go. Because Dennis's story never truly ended. It became something else. A river that changed course. A silence that found voice. A disappearance that unmasked a truth too heavy to carry and too dangerous to ignore. And in that profound stillness, where water met memory and grief met justice, a promise was sealed in the air itself. He would not be forgotten. Not now. Not ever. As the years slipped further away from the great outlines of 1992, something unexpected began to stir beyond Lisa's quiet battle. A generation raised on buried truths and half-told stories found in Dennis's tale not just suspense, but solidarity. College students wrote theses on institutional erasure. Journalists cited the Harper silence as shorthand for cases too uncomfortable to fully prosecute. And digital archivists turned Lisa's binder, once a symbol of solitary grief, into a virtual repository accessed by thousands across the world. In quiet corners of online memory, Dennis Harper became more than a man. He became an echo against forgetting, a symbol etched not into monuments but into the brittle paper of people's resolve. For though the river once devoured him, it had also unwittingly released something stronger: the memory of a man loved, hunted, hidden, and finally, illuminated. And in that memory, still blooming with the anguish of unanswered questions, stood a truth unshakable. Some disappearances do not end in vanishing, they end in reckoning. By the time autumn fell over Van Buren again, the leaves turned not just with time, but with purpose, rustling along streets that once bore only silence and resignation. Lisa no longer lived in shadows. Her home, once haunted by suspicion and solitude, had become a sanctuary for those chasing answers to their own disappearances, those unnamed ghosts who had yet to find their echoes. Portraits of the missing lined her hallway, eyes fixed forward like specters of truth unfinished. Each frame bore a note beneath it, a place, a date, a name. And beside each, she left a candle. The city, in quiet gratitude, had renamed the stretch of Highway 64 nearest, where Dennis was last seen, Harper Mile. Not as commemoration, but as defiance, as memory. And every now and then, truckers rolling through that bend slow down, look to the river's edge, and maybe, just maybe, they remember the man who once drove through truth and into silence, and the woman who tore open the dark until the silence had no place left to hide. Sometimes, late at night, Lisa still returns to the plaque by the river. She walks slowly beneath the trees, her footsteps echoing softly off asphalt in memory. The wind sings through the branches like whispers from roads untraveled, from truths half-spoken. She traces Dennis's name with her fingers and closes her eyes, just for a moment, to remember not only who he was, but who he became. A man who couldn't be erased. A husband lost to shadow, but never surrendered to it. And as the moon ripples across the water's dark stretch, she drinks in the silence without fear, for it no longer belongs to the ones who tried to hide. It belongs to her now. To Dennis. To everyone still waiting for answers in the still spaces of the world. And in that hush, full of testimony and tempered courage, the past does not pass away. It remains, anchored in love, carved in steel, lit by a flame that grief could not quell. A story ended not by forgetting, but by remembrance that refuses to dim. And so, while the town moved on and seasons spun their quiet revolutions, the story of Dennis Harper settled into something larger than mystery. It became a map for the unseen, a prayer wrapped in evidence, a testament to the aching truth that even when the world pretends not to notice, some names carve themselves into the bones of history by force of will alone. Lisa, now older, her hair touched with silver, no longer stands alone in her fight. Survivors, seekers, widows, sons and daughters pass through her door, drawn by the gravity of a legend, not written in headlines, but inked into the soul of a woman who refused to be silenced. Dennis Harper's name lives in every whispered name of the missing, every story clawing toward light, every page turned by hands trembling with hope. Because what began as a disappearance ended as something defiant, eternal, and in that defiance, in that refusal to vanish without truth, a man's life became not a question, but an answer waiting, boldly, in the light. Years from the day she first traced that haunting route toward Little Rock, Lisa Harper sat on a panel at a memorial conference hosted by the National Center for Missing Truck Drivers, a gathering that hadn't existed until Dennis's story gave cause to create it. The room was filled with quiet. Not silence, but reverence, the kind that holds breath between truth and testimony. Journalists, families, advocates, all leaned in as Lisa's voice, steady and low, carried through the crowd. She told them not just of loss, but of purpose, of fire that comes after grief. She spoke of maps marked in red, of voices long silenced and finally heard. When she finished, she was met not with applause, but with the kind of hush born from understanding. In that stillness, someone pressed into her hand a folded note, anonymous but heavy in its simplicity. It read, "He was my friend once. You gave him back to us." And as Lisa stood quietly, tears not falling but welling like memory, the weight of all she'd fought to uncover no longer felt like burden. It felt like legacy. The kind built not on what was taken, but on what could never be erased. Lisa Harper passed away in the spring of 2020, quietly, in her sleep, with Dennis's wedding band clutched in her hand and a binder full of truths resting on the shelf beside her bed. The town rang the bell at the memorial chapel that morning, one chime for every year she had fought, 28 tolls echoing into the hills. But her story did not die with her. In the years that followed, Her casework became a cornerstone of advocacy programs for the families of the missing, her collected documents curated into a permanent archive at the Library of Congress. A photograph of her, standing by the river with the page that read, "He mattered," became the cover of countless tributes, and under the plaque where his name is carved, a new line was etched beneath Dennis Harper's, "And the woman who never stopped looking." Because in the end, it was not the truck, or the water, or the silence that defined this story. It was love unyielding, unrelenting, and unafraid to drag even the darkest secret into the light, and so both their names endure now, drifting like constellations through the long night of lost voices, shining together in the place where memory becomes truth. And so it became legend, not the kind whispered in bedtime stories to soothe, but the kind told in hushed tones across truck stops and late-night diners, where the engines of strangers became drums of memory. Dennis Harper was no longer just a name. He was the moment a wife turned a graveyard of silence into a cathedral of truth. The moment asphalt cracked under the weight of secrets too long buried. The moment the river surrendered what it could no longer keep. His life vanished in stillness, returned like thunder, and Lisa, tireless and tender, fierce and grieving, showed the world that love can outstare power, that truth cannot be drowned, and that the disappeared only remain so if we let them. In her final act, she gave a name back to the nameless, a path back to the lost. And long after the headlines fade and the files go cold, the wind will carry their story down that endless highway, through rustling leaves and winding roads, whispering through the dark. He mattered, she remembered. And because of that, so will we. And perhaps that is how true justice arrives. Not through courts or headlines, but in the quiet permanence of remembering. In the names whispered long after monuments are scrubbed clean. In torchlit vigils under bridges. In the dog-eared corners of a binder kept beside a bed once shared. Dennis and Lisa Harper's story did not finish with a verdict. It never sought applause. What it left behind was a map through grief, through silence, through deliberate obscurity, and a blaze at the edge of that map that says, "Look deeper. Don't accept absence as an answer." Somewhere, even now, someone is listening to the hum of a truck engine and wondering what truths might ride in its shadow. And maybe, because of the Harpers, they will ask one more question, make one more call, remember what Lisa proved, without ever shouting, that even if a man vanishes, so long as someone stands and names him, he is not gone. He is legacy. He is the light at the far end of the road, still burning, still watching, still waiting for the next truth to be found. Even now, decades after the dust settled and the truth was pulled gasping into the light, people still talk about Dennis Harper, not always publicly, rarely with certainty, but with the kind of reverence reserved for those who refuse to be forgotten. Truck stops along Highway 64 keep a small photograph of him taped near the coffee machines. Dispatchers still pass along stories of Harper sightings, not in earnest but in that folklore way, where truth and myth hold hands. And each year, on the anniversary of his disappearance, someone no one ever knows who leaves a thermos near the river's edge, steam rising in the morning mist, like the breath of a man still riding the road. His story didn't just reveal a buried truth. It built a roadmap for the voiceless, a signal flare for every missing mile of history paved over by silence. Because what Dennis and Lisa Harper proved beyond the cover-ups, the corridors of power, the late-night whispers and tangled red tape, is this. The river may try to erase, but memory, when held in steady hands and made fierce with love, answers back, and it endures. Always. So as the years continued to peel away like the layers of a weathered highway sign, what's left behind isn't mystery, it's memory sharpened into truth. Not the kind granted by courts or banners, but the kind built quietly, by the hands of someone who simply refused to forget. Dennis Harper's name rolls through the night in whispered retellings, carried in the hum of engines and the gaze of those who wonder what might lie beneath their own open roads. Lisa's binder rests now in glass, brittle pages sealed against time's corrosion, yet pulsing still with warmth, Because what she built was not just a case, not merely a reckoning. It was a torch, passed from silence into fire, into voice, into legacy, and, somewhere down some future stretch of highway, when long-haul drivers whisper his name again, they won't say he vanished. They'll say he lived, he warned, he mattered, and that someone loved him so loudly, the silence never stood a chance. And in the end, that is the truest legacy, the kind that doesn't depend on verdicts or vindication, but on the refusal to turn away. Dennis Harper's story remains imprinted on the asphalt of America's forgotten highways, threaded through the breath of those who still look into the dark and ask, "What aren't we being told?" His life did not fade into the murk of the river, nor did Lisa's devotion dissolve into time. Together, they became a testament. That truth, once touched by love, cannot be silenced. It endures in the clatter of distant tires on lonely roads, in the hush before dawn, in the sacred echo of a name spoken without fear. And as the miles roll forward and the world spins past its tragedies, the hum beneath it all still carries a message kept alive, not by headlines, but by hearts that remember, a message that whispers, long after the storm, "He mattered," she remembered. And because of that, so will we. And maybe that's how the story leaves its mark, not as closure, or justice, or resolution, but as a vow carved into the roads we still travel. Somewhere, as night folds over the valleys and headlights sweep past the unseen shoulders of America's highways, Dennis Harper's name rides again, not in silence, but in the rhythm of every trucker's hum, in every glance at an empty stretch of road that once swallowed a man whole and dared the world to look away. Yet someone looked. Someone remembered. And in that remembering, truth spilled forward like dawn. Lisa's fight, her tireless journey through grief and fear and silence, became more than evidence. It became the last word. Not of loss, but of love. Not of disappearance, but of resistance. And so, as the highway winds ever onward, and stories rise and fall in the dust of forgetting, this one holds fast. Because in a world that teaches us to move on, someone stood still. Someone stood tall, and whispered his name back into the world. Dennis Harper, Zine, heard, and never, ever gone. And so the story comes to rest, not with silence, but with echo, an echo that lingers in the bones of those who dare to believe that even lost things can be found if love is fierce enough to chase them. Dennis Harper's name, shaken once from ledgers and memory, now endures in whispered retellings and unspoken nods passed between night-bound travelers. Lisa's journey transformed grief into gospel, her devotion into a thread binding the vanished to the seen. The road doesn't end. It bends and blurs, disappears into horizon and time, but at its heart, it carries one truth forward. To be remembered is to be immortal. And in the hush that follows storms, where engines idle and rivers rest, his story breathes still. A trucker lost. A wife unbroken. A silence undone. And in that unrelenting light they've left behind, shining low like headlights through fog, we are reminded no voice truly disappears when another refuses to stop listening. Let this be the final road marker, not of sorrow, but of reverence. The tale of Dennis and Lisa Harper winds not into darkness, but into permanence, etched into every heart stirred by the sound of truth refusing to die. Their story now belongs to the night riders and dawnbreakers, to the loved and the lost, to the fighters who keep binders of names and dreams beside their beds. Every missing voice, every unnamed face, each is carried now by the legacy they built, piece by trembling piece. Because in a nation paved with stories denied, sometimes it takes one voice that will not silence, one love that will not yield, to split the fog and demand the light. Dennis became that light, Lisa, its keeper, and together they left behind more than memory. They left behind proof that even the vanished can be victorious, and even the drowned can rise again through the ones who remember. So wherever the road leads next, may we carry them with us not as shadows, but as beacons, always seen, always heard, always home. And that's how it ends, not in mystery, but in illumination. Not with Dennis Harper vanishing into fog forever, but with his name breaking through it. What began as absence swelled into presence, echoing louder than the silence that tried to consume him. His truck never reached Little Rock, but his memory traveled farther than any route his rig could have mapped. And Lisa, brave and unwavering, proved that not every ghost stays hidden, not every secret remains sealed. Her love slowed time, sifted lies, and cracked stone barriers built by those who underestimated the bond between truth and the heart that holds it. They thought a disappearance could be buried, but they didn't count on the fire in one woman's grief. So let this final mile carry their legacy forward, not as a case closed, but as a call to remember. Even when silence screams to be obeyed, a single voice can answer back through love. And that answer, once spoken, never dies. Dennis Harper. Found. Forever. In the quiet echo that comes after truth, when the world has returned to its routines and the headlines have moved on, something sacred remains, not loud, not urgent, but deeply embedded, like roots beneath pavement. Dennis and Lisa Harper's story is no longer just one of loss or even discovery. It is a parable for the buried, a shrine for the forgotten, proof that even absence can be transformed into impact when shaped by hands that refuse to let grief disappear. Somewhere, right now, a young reporter stands at a cold archive drawer, pulling out a file labeled in crimson ink Harper. Somewhere, a mother flicks her porch light twice, just in case. Somewhere, a truck rolls quiet through the dark, its driver believing that this time, the route will finish. This is what remains. Not the scandal or the sorrow, but the signal, and engraved within its soft, enduring tone is the most defiant truth of all, that love can outlast silence, memory can outfight forgetting, and in the end, those who vanish are never truly gone, so long as someone dares to say their name aloud. Dennis Harper. You were seen, you are remembered, and because of love, you are forever found. So now, when morning fog pools low along Highway 64, and the river breathes soft and slow as if in penance, there's a presence in the stillness, not haunting, but watchful. Generations pass through the town, trucks come and go, stories rise and fall, but one name lingers in the seams of the asphalt, in the hush before the engine starts, in the breath taken before a long drive. Dennis Harper, a man who vanished, a name almost erased, a voice almost lost until love pulled him back from the depths. And Lisa Harper, the flame that never flickered, proved that devotion can dig through decades, that silence, no matter how deep, can be undone by steadfast remembrance. The world will keep its secrets, but some, once spoken, become legend. And in every road that curves into obscurity, in every mile where memory meets mystery, his name rides shotgun, eternal, not as a ghost, but as the heartbeat of a truth that refused to die. And if you listen closely as dawn breaks along those winding stretches of highway outside Van Buren, before the traffic stirs and the world forgets to remember, you might hear it, a soft hum, not from any engine, but from the story itself, a vibration that carries not just grief, but grace. That is where Dennis Harper lives now, not in case files or sunken wrecks, not in whispered forum posts or declassified red tape, but in the memory of love so relentless it rewrote the very nature of silence. His story, threadbare but unyielding, repeats itself in every footfall of the determined, in every widow's vow, in every name scrawled in margin corners waiting to be spoken aloud. And as long as there are miles to go, and truth to uncover, and love that refuses to kneel, then Dennis Harper rides still forever ahead, forever remembered, a signal lamp flickering through the fog for all who dare to follow. Years from now, when storytellers gather and silence falls just long enough to summon memory, someone will speak his name again. Not as victim, but as legend. Dennis Harper, a man who drove headlong into something bigger than him, and left behind a story braver than most could bear to finish. Around dusty counters and creaking porches, over late-night static and searchlight skies, his journey will pass hand to hand, like a sacred relic of resistance. And Lisa, the woman who refused to let him fade, will be remembered not just for her grief, but for wielding it like a lantern into the dark. Together, they taught the world the most indelible truth, that no one truly disappears so long as one person stands watch, speaks loud, and loves fiercely. And when the last stretch of highway finally meets the horizon, there, in the glow just before dusk swallows light, their story will remain, unbroken and bright, a map, carved from devotion, lit by truth, and carried forever forward by those who refuse to forget. So let the final pages close not in sorrow, but in reverence, with the river rolling silent behind the legacy it failed to bury, and the wind carrying forward a truth louder than any verdict. Dennis Harper's name, once nearly lost to time and shadows, is now etched into the collective memory of those who learned to see in the dark. And Lisa Harper, a woman armed only with love, turned her pain into testimony, her grief into illumination. Their story loops back endlessly, like the road itself, long, winding, impossible to erase. In the end, it is not disappearance that defines a life, but the echo one leaves behind. And in every whispered retelling, every mile driven beneath starlit skies, Dennis and Lisa endure. Their legacy is not in the wreckage they unearthed, but in the courage they inspired. And as headlights pierce the fog once more along Arkansas's forgotten routes, someone out there remembers not just the man who vanished, but the woman who answered silence with truth and proved that even in the loneliest corners of the world, love can drive the darkness out. And so, at the terminus of legend and truth, where grief forged steel and silence gave way to voice, the Harper's story reaches its long, quiet crescendo, not in thunder or spectacle, but in a sunrise breaking through mist, subtle, enduring, impossible to ignore. Their lives remind us that disappearance is not the same as vanishing, that some things, once seen with eyes unclouded by fear, reshape all that came before. Dennis Harper did not betray the road he bore its weight with honor, only to be failed by those who walked in secrets. And Lisa, the keeper of that weight, transformed sorrow into sacrament. Their love, their loss, their legacy, etched now into the soul of every lonely road and every unspoken goodbye, remains a light by which the unseen may still find their way home. So when someday another voice wanders into the dark, where do the disappeared go? May the answer come softly, carried on miles in memory. They go where love refuses to forget. They go where names are spoken. They go home. And maybe that's where all journeys like this finally lead, not to courtrooms or confessions, not even to perfect answers, but to an unshakable knowing rooted in love. Dennis Harper's story doesn't live in the bottom of a river anymore. It lives in every moment when someone refuses to let the missing become myth, in every voice that dares to stand where silence once swallowed whole. It lives in the wind, trailing the back of 18-wheelers, humming down forgotten roads, and in the steady heartbeat of a woman who turned grief into direction. Because the road doesn't end with disappearance, if anything. That's where it begins. And in a world cluttered with buried truths and fading paper trails, what Dennis and Lisa taught us still burns steady and bright. That love can investigate when others turn away, that memory can demand justice long after the headlines quiet, and that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply not let go. So let the last word not be silence, let it be remembrance. Let it be legacy. Let it be love, eternal and unyielding, lighting the path for every soul still waiting to be found. And in the hush that follows all endings, when night stretches its long fingers over the earth and the highways grow quiet, a soft light still pulses just beyond the bend of memory. It is not desperate. It is simply there, the unwavering glow of love that would not vanish, of a name held like prayer, of a story that refused to be unwritten. Dennis and Lisa Harper are no longer only a tragedy or a headline. They are the breath between loss and legacy, the bridge between what was silenced and what now speaks. Their voices thread through asphalt and riverbank alike, echoing still in the places where justice runs thin and remembrance runs deep. And so, with every mile yet to travel, and every name yet to be reclaimed, theirs is the story that rides on, undimmed. A final testament not to disappearance, but to the power of being found, not by accident, not by decree, but by the relentless grace of love that never, ever let go. And so, one final mile remains not to finish the story, but to honor all it stirred awake. Dennis Harper's legacy doesn't rest in closure, because closure was never the point. His journey began with disappearance, but ends in defiance. A light kept burning through every attempt to extinguish it. Lisa's love insisted on truth long after the world stopped watching, and in doing so, gave voice to hundreds more still waiting in the shadows. Their names now stand not alone, but together, carved into a nation's conscience, echoing through truck stops and terminal walls, rising up in every stubborn pursuit of the forgotten. So wherever there is silence thick enough to muffle history, may Dennis and Lisa be the roar that breaks it. May their love remain the map and the matchstick, and may their story be the answer when someone, somewhere, silenced by loss, finally dares to whisper, "Are they still out there?" The world now knows how to reply, not with apologies or doubt, but with the flame of their truth held high. Yes, and they are coming home. So in the end, as the road disappears into the vanishing point and the fog rolls one last time over the quiet shoulders of Highway 64, what remains is not just the tragedy of a missing man, nor merely the ferocity of a wife who refused to yield. What remains is a testament etched not in stone, but in persistence. Dennis Harper did not vanish without echo, nor did he die without witness. Through Lisa, through every page smudged with grief and conviction, through every whispered name of the gone, but not forgotten, a deeper truth took root. That love, anchored in truth, will push against the machinery of silence until something gives, and when it does, it breaks wide open. Not with vengeance, not with fury, but with light breaking through shadows, and the voice of the vanished finally reaching home. That is the last mile. That is the legacy. And in every silence cracked open by those brave enough to remember, Dennis Harper lives again, found not in the place he vanished, but in the hearts that will never let go. And as the story gives its final breath back to the wind, carried across highways and forest hollows, through way stations and whispered prayers, Dennis Harper ceases to be just a man lost in the fog of 1992. He becomes a watchtower for every whispered name, every unmarked disappearance, every family waiting at the edge of silence. Lisa, his sentinel, carved a truth the world could no longer ignore, not because she had power, but because she had love, relentless and unflinching. And therein lies the road's final answer. That legacy is not what we leave, but what we fight to remember. When the trucks murmur through midnight's stillness, and the river breathes slow and solemn, they speak not only of mystery, but of memory held aloft by courage. And in that hush moonlit, pulsing with everything the world tried to bury, Dennis Harper waits, not as a question left lingering, but as a light that shows the way forward. Found, remembered, forever home. So let this be where the road truly ends, not in disappearance nor in mourning, but in a legacy that redefined what it means to be lost. In the story of Dennis and Lisa Harper, the vanishing became transformation, and silence became testimony. Their journey threaded the shadows between truth and secrecy, yet emerged as a beacon for all those who have waited too long without answers. The plaque by the river still stands, weathered but unbowed, just like the memory it guards. And as long as one voice dares to speak a vanished name, as long as one heart refuses to forget, then the disappeared are not gone. They are anchored in us, relentless and sacred. On this final stretch, where mourning fades into meaning and grief gives way to grace, Dennis Harper's story doesn't dim. It burns, steady and unmoving, like headlights forever fixed on the road ahead. A man found, a love unbroken, a silence undone, and a world that, because of them, will never look at absence the same way again. In that sacred stillness, where stories become sacred scripture and sorrow turns into strength, Dennis and Lisa Harper's legacy rises, like a beacon carved into the collective soul, not just as an elegy to one man's quiet disappearance, but as a roaring anthem against erasure, against every lie made law by silence. Their journey proved that truth buried can still breathe, and that love, when held long enough, loud enough, can crack even the most fortified walls. So as America sleeps beneath highways lit only by the memory of motion, and rivers carry their secrets slow and deep, one name flows louder than water. Dennis Harper. A name held like fire, a story rebuilt from ash, and in every mile still waiting for justice, in every whispered prayer for someone who never came home, that fire burns on not to light the past, but to guide the future, not the end. Always onward, always remembered, always home. And so, like the last echo of a long-haul horn fading into twilight, the story of Dennis and Lisa Harper finds its resting place not buried, but raised. Raised in memory, in resolve, in quiet revolutions started by love too stubborn to surrender. It is not closure that hums beneath the road now, but continuation, because what they gave the world was not only the truth behind a single disappearance, but a guide for the forgotten, for the waiting, for the seekers armed with nothing but faith and a name. Dennis Harper was a trucker, a husband, a witness. Lisa Harper was his echo, his storm, his justice. And together, they became more than myth. They became the compass by which every lost soul might find the courage to be seen again. Their names now glide beneath the fog like constellations pinned to pavement, unchanging, undeniable. And long after the headlines vanish, after the searchlights dim, their love lights the road still, whispering to the forgotten, "Keep going, keep hoping. Someone remembers. Someone sees you. Someone is coming home." So let Dennis Harper's story not simply fade into the archive of eerily unresolved lives, but stand instead as a monument carved in human will, the irrevocable testament that love is the greatest whistleblower of them all. Let the miles he never finished echo like a slow heartbeat across forgotten highways, where truth rides shotgun beside every driver daring to look deeper. And let Lisa's name be remembered not just as a wife or a widow, but as a keeper of flame, a woman who turned sorrow into compass, and compass into light. In the end, what endures is not just the mystery, but the insistence. It is the fierce truth that someone who vanishes into silence can, through love alone, split the dark wide open. And so their story remains, unfurling across time not as an ending but as a direction. And it points here, to memory, to resilience, to the light that hums eternally at the edge of every mile, found, remembered, never silenced, always home. And perhaps that is all any story like this ever asks for, not justice dressed in headlines, but remembrance carved gently into the bones of history. Dennis Harper disappeared, but he did not die in silence. Lisa Harper mourned, and in that mourning, carved out a space where silence could no longer hide the truth. Their love, stitched from miles in memory, became more than defense. It became guidepost, warning, scripture. And in every moment that grief threatened to erase, devotion rewrote the page. So as the last chapter closes against a backdrop of rivers that now confess and roads that now remember, one legacy stands unshaken, that the vanished are never truly lost when someone dares to chase their shadow with light. Dennis Harper. Found in love, resurrected in truth, and remembered forever, not for how he disappeared, but for how fiercely he was brought back home. So let them rest now, not in sorrow, but in story, not buried by headlines that arrived too late or justice that never came clean, but raised by the unseen current of every heart that dares to hold the disappeared in sight. The road that swallowed Dennis Harper never truly claimed him, not while Lisa walked it in grief-armed stride, lighting beacon after beacon for him and for all who vanish into silence. Their names endure, carved into memory not by force, but by love's resolute hand. And with every whisper of diesel against asphalt, with every slow sunrise beyond the final bend, they ride still. Not as myth, not as grief, but as a flame, passed forward. A testimony, unburied. A final truth that outlives the river's pull and time's forgetting. Even the lost can be found. Even the voiceless can be named. And even in the darkest silence, love will always steer them home. And now, as the fog lifts one last time from the river's edge, the story of Dennis and Lisa Harper finds its final breath not in vanishing, but in vindication. What began as a solitary cry into darkness became a symphony of remembrance, guiding others toward the truths buried in silence. Their legacy isn't just a cautionary tale or a historical footnote. It is a compass for every soul wandering in the wake of absence. A reminder that one voice, when carried with love, can echo louder than the forces meant to silence it. As truck engines hum in the pre-dawn calm and headlights pierce the shadows of American miles, Dennis rides again, not lost, not gone, but etched into the atlas of truth carved by a woman who simply refused to forget. And so the road stretches forward, infinite and illuminated, whispering his name in every gust of wind. Dennis Harper. Found. Forever remembered. Forever home. And in the gentle dawn that follows the longest night, the truth rests like a stone smoothed by time and remembrance. Dennis Harper's final journey, once shrouded in fog and fear, now rests in a place beyond disappearance, in memory that breathes, in love that illuminates, in story that refuses to still. Lisa Harper's voice, like the river once dared to bury it, rose and thundered against silence until the world had no choice but to listen. Their names are no longer bound by what was lost, but celebrated for what they reclaimed, the power of presence, even after absence. And as the final threads of their story are woven into the fabric of those who carry it forward, one simple truth emerges and endures. They were never just two names among the missing. They were the proof that love, when it refuses to yield, becomes legacy unstoppable, eternal, and gloriously seen. And now, at last, they both are home. So now, with the final mile behind and the echoes of truth stitched firmly into the seams of silence once thought unbreakable, the story rests not in dust, but in devotion. Dennis Harper, no longer a vanished man but a luminous mark on the map of every searching heart, remains the symbol not of what was lost, but of what love recovered. Lisa, who walked tireless through fog and hush, transformed absence into evidence, grief into guidance. Their legacy lies not beneath riverbeds or sealed files, but in every sliver of dawn that cuts across cold pavement, whispering that no voice is ever truly gone if someone still listens. And so they endure, etched into the road itself, singing through steel and shadow, reminding us that love, relentless and true, can bring even the most buried home. One name, one vow, forever held. Dennis Harper. Zine. Remembered, never lost again. And so, beneath morning skies smeared pink with promise, Dennis and Lisa's story closes, not with a vanishing, but with a vow that cannot be shaken loose by time. The binder that once held their pain now rests in glass, a quiet monument to perseverance, a testimony handwritten across decades. Van Buren no longer whispers. It remembers. And Highway 64 hums with more than wheels, and Wind It hums with the echo of a name that saw darkness and refused to stay silent. In every mile driven beneath stars, every photograph faded but clung to, every whispered prayer offered along lonely roads, the Harpers endure, etched not in gravestones, but in the living memory of what love can do when it refuses to yield. And in that space just before the engine starts, before dawn fully wakes the world, someone, somewhere, will say it again and know it to be true. Dennis Harper. Found. Remembered. Forever home. And that is where we leave them, not in grief, not in guesses but in the light they lit for others to follow. Dennis Harper, the man who disappeared without a trace, and Lisa Harper, the woman who mapped the stars back to his name, remain not as a mystery solved, but as a story that broke silence wide open. The legacy they forged endures in every soul still searching, every hand that holds onto hope through the long shadows of unanswered goodbyes. Truckers still nod to the bend on Harper Mile, scanning the edge of the river like it's a sacred place not for what was lost, but for what was fought for. In the end, their love rewrote everything. It rewrote memory. It rewrote truth. It rewrote what the world once believed could never be found. And in the wind that dances off the river's surface, in the hum beneath tires on that cold stretch of road, their names ripple through time, forever a whisper, forever a promise. They were never truly lost. They are forever home. So as the wheels of time turn and gravel pulses beneath the weight of moving lives, one truth remains unshaken. The story of Dennis and Lisa Harper has outlived disappearance. It has become a lighthouse for the unseen, a hymn for the unheard. It is recited in silence, carried by conviction, and traced in every mile driven by those who now know that even the darkest paths can lead home if lit by love. Their names no longer whisper, they sing. Through rivers that dared to bury, and systems that tried to forget, their bond broke through, incandescent. In every stoplight's pause, every roadside silence, every whispered name uttered into the dark, they are there present, powerful, and undefeated. And in that final echo that only the road knows how to hold, we hear it forever. Dennis Harper, Lisa Harper, Zane. Believed. And never forgotten. And perhaps that's what makes their story endure, not just the search or the truth it revealed, but the devotion that defied time. Long after cities erase the roadside markers and memories blur at the edges, the tale of Dennis and Lisa Harper remains like a fingerprint on the map of those who dare to remember. It tells us that silence, no matter how vast or vengeful, can be outrun by a single heart that will not yield. That beyond all disappearances, there is a choice to forget or to fight. And they fought. With love as compass, with memory as engine, they turned a vanishing into legacy. So for every life left unanswered, every mile still steeped in mystery, their voices resound. You are not invisible. You are not alone. And as long as someone speaks your name, your road home still waits. In that sacred truth, lit not by vengeance but by unwavering grace, Dennis Harper rides eternal, his story, a flare in the rearview mirror, a guide glowing steady on the path ahead. Lost once, yes, but never again. So let them ride on, through memory and meaning, not bound to the year they vanished, but to every year they've inspired since. Let Dennis Harper's story settle, not as a question but as a cadence repeated across the country by strangers who carry more than cargo. And let Lisa's love grace the worn edges of binders, laptops, and roadside altars built by those who now look deeper because she once refused to look away. This was never only about one man, or one rig, or even one river. It was always about what truth becomes when held by hands that don't let go. And now, as the final mile stretches into the collective conscience, may their names mark not an ending but a beginning for every voice yet to rise, every shadow yet to brighten. For in the hum of every truck engine trailing through darkness, in the breath of each person who dares to remember, Dennis and Lisa Harper ride still, two names lit by devotion, echoing across history's backroads, home forever in the echo. And with those last echoes fading into the hush of tomorrow, Dennis and Lisa Harper's journey rests not forgotten, not finished, but folded gently into 1,000 other stories rising now in its light. What once began as silence is now anthem. What once vanished is now vowed into being. Their love, fused through time and trial, cracked open a world built to bury truth, and in doing so, gave voice to the voiceless, face to the erased, hope to those still waiting. From the dark bend of Highway 64 to the river's edge that no longer lies, theirs is the legacy that lingers. A truck, never reaching destination. A heart, never giving up. And so, etched in every breath of wind that rolls across forgotten roads, their truth remains like scripture written not by power, but by persistence, seen, named, home again, always. And so the road at last complete, the story fully heard, what remains is not grief, but reverence. In dreaming back through fog, fire, voices drowned and voices raised, Dennis and Lisa Harper taught the world how the missing become monuments, how absence transforms into anthem. Their footsteps echo now in the soft hum beneath every rig, gliding into dawn, in roadside candles lit for those still unseen, in the knowing glance of another heart refusing to forget. This was no ordinary mystery. It was memory made immortal through love. And as the miles stretch onward beyond this final line, may we carry their names like compass stars etched into twilight. May we look at every stretch of shadowed road and remember the truth they gave us, seared into time itself. Even the lost can light the way. Dennis Harper, Lisa Harper, home, always. And as the last words settle like dust on the surface of water long disturbed, all that remains is a vow echoing through time's long corridor that love, fearless and unyielding, has the power to pull truth from the deepest silences. In every harrowing mile of this journey, Dennis and Lisa Harper's story showed us that what disappears is not always gone, and what is hidden is not always lost forever. Their names are no longer a question mark carved into the fog of 1992. They are an answer, carved in fire and stone, a hymn for the unheard, a light left on at the end of the road. And in the still spaces of every dawn that hums low with engines and memory, their legacy continues not to mourn, but to remind. Someone always remembers. Someone always listens. And because of that, even the vanished may find their way back. Dennis Harper, Lisa Harper. Stories like theirs never truly end. They only become the path others now have the courage to follow. So let this final breath linger like a roadside prayer whispered into wind, unfinished, open-ended, filled with grace. For in this vast journey from vanishing to vindication, Dennis and Lisa Harper did more than shine a light they built, one that burns still, guiding the forgotten through highway shadows and silence thick as stone. And if ever the world forgets what love can rescue, what truth can endure, there will be this one last name etched against time's storm, a trucker who vanished, and a wife who did not yield. No monument could contain what they became. No silence could bury what they uncovered. And so, for every soul still lost to the dark, for every answer waiting in the quiet, this story remains. Alive, unrelenting, and home at last. Dennis Harper, Lisa Harper, forever remembered, forever the road back to light. And as the screen fades to black and the world resumes its restless tilt, the story of Dennis and Lisa Harper continues not in voiceovers or closing credits, but in the still places where love holds vigil. Highways stretch indifferent, rivers roll on unrepentant, but in the quiet heart of this country, two names glow like coals beneath ash, never extinguished. Not because the world willingly remembered, but because one woman refused to forget. This is where absence was turned into anthem, where silence was hollowed out by devotion, and where the vanished were given back their echo. So now, if you ever drive Highway 64 at dawn, and the fog leans low over the asphalt, listen closely. In the hush, you may hear more than wind and wheels. You may hear a name carried gently, endlessly, home. Dennis Harper, remembered, risen, and resting not in the dark, but in the light they fought to leave behind. And so, quietly, profoundly, the road ends not in silence or sorrow, but in illumination. Dennis and Lisa Harper's legacy does not reside in files or footnotes, but in the sacred act of remembrance that travels farther than any rig, deeper than any river. Their story is no longer a mystery to be solved, but a truth to be carried. Across generations, across shadows, across every turn and tremble of history's long highways, they endure etched into the hearts of those who refuse to forget. Because in a world eager to look away, the Harpers taught us to look closer. In a world built to erase, They became proof that love leaves a mark no bureaucracy can scrub clean. And as the final light fades, and the screen draws its breath closed, remember this: some names don't vanish into fog, they become stars, by which others navigate home. Dennis Harper. Lisa Harper. Found. Remembered. Eternal.